Good morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Today we'll be continuing our study in the book of James, chapter 3, looking at verses 7 through 12. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea, is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Last time, James talked about the tongue. And if we remember, he begins with this word for. He talks about the tongue is unruly. The tongue is unruly, about how it's a fire. And he gave warnings against those times we want to be teachers. And he talked about the destructive nature of the tongue and its peril, which should cause us to consider times we want to give instruction. We want to tell someone how it is, or we want to set someone right. That's not to say those things can't or shouldn't be done, but it should be approached cautiously with these warnings in mind. And James continues this by reminding us that every kind of beast of the field, every kind of reptile, a bird, of creature has been tamed by mankind. All of these sorts of animals have been brought into human subjection. Humans, by this time, even in ancient Rome, had been able to catch lions and tigers and bears and to trap them to bring them back for entertainment in the Colosseum. A massive animal, such as an elephant, had been mastered for the purpose of warfare. These incredible, strong, powerful animals were at the mercy of humans. But James says this, but while those things have been tamed, no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil. It cannot be set under human subjection. While we can subjugate, say, a tiger for our entertainment, we still say things that bring heartache and destruction to those around us. Specifically, James says that the tongue is a restless evil. He says it's full of deadly poison, of unruly evil, that it cannot be controlled. As we think of this word poison right here, that should cause us to think of a snake, and we're fortunate because that's about the one animal that I'm able to draw in this whole scenario. When we think of a snake and words and talking, it should cause us to think about the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3, where Eve was tempted to eat of what the serpent tempted her, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we don't have to go very far because we're going to get tons of references back to the early chapters of Genesis. James says that we bless our God and Father and we curse men. And then he emphasizes this, who are made in the similitude of God, men who are made in the similitude of God. In the Greek version of the Old Testament, in the image of God poem, there in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, when it says humans are made in the image of God, this is the exact word there in Greek, the similitude of God. So we have this other connection here back to the story in the Garden of Eden. And we'll notice more connections if we notice this, that animals have been tamed by humans. This once again goes back to dominion, where God gave man dominion over all the earth. So the references here to creation and fall are going to be too numerous to write off as just coincidence. And while these connections are cool, let's not allow that literary artistry to distract us from the message, because it helps us further understand it and see how we should live and how we should speak. James is saying whenever we do this, we're talking out of one side of our mouth. We're praising God when we bless God, but when we curse men, when we bless God and when we curse men, we might justify saying it, yeah, God's creator. It's most important that we speak correctly to and about him. And while that might make some sense on the surface, James says we are cursing men who are made in the similitude of God, that it is just as high of an infraction to disrespect the person who is made in the image of God and the likeness of God. That person you just cut down is imbued with divine significance because of God's declaration. So when you dishonor that other person, you have dishonored God. And then James declares emphatically, out of this same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. The same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. And he says, these things ought not to be so. He's very clear here. These things ought not to be so. As we look through the Old Testament, we find all sorts of references to blessing and curse. Throughout all of it, they don't go together. If you look through the early chapters of the Bible, the early books of the Bible specifically, the Torah, the Pentateuch, those first 5 books, you've got blessing and you've got curse, but you can't have them together. It's not right. It's unseemly for it to be the case. They mix like oil and water. Having blessing and cursing together is contradictory to their intrinsic nature. And he goes on to give us a couple examples of this. We mentioned oil and water. He mentions here fresh and salty water. He mentions further the idea of a fig tree and olives. And then, of course, a grapevine bearing figs as well. There's no middle ground here in these things. A salt pond doesn't produce fresh. So what are we to make of these things? He's showing that in these cases, you've got one or you've got the other. You're going to have to make a choice. You can't have fresh, salty water. You can't have an olive fig tree, and you can't have blessing and curse. Our praises to God don't override our curses. If we're cursing our brethren, we are being a curse. And as we've mentioned here, there's so many nods and illustrations that point back to the very beginning of the Bible. We've got so many organic metaphors of trees and streams, created things with the potential to bless and to help. And this gives us another tie to that creation story. There's so much potential in the words that we say, but because of a desire to choose wisdom on our own terms instead of God's, we become a curse. When we speak, we have the opportunity to bring blessing and life into the world, or we have the chance to bring death and immeasurable destruction. It's as though every time that we are opening our mouths, we stand before the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, with its fruit, and we're making a choice. Which direction are we to go? Every time we speak is a choice. It is a choice to do good, to bring life, to bring flourishing, to bring blessing, or it is a choice to bring death and decay and to bring curse into the world. That is the significance of the words that we speak. As the writer of Proverbs says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. So we should be careful with the words that we say. And as we think about what this means for us, I hope that you choose life and that you choose blessing, that you aim to make others stronger with your words. And even in times of correction, you do it with a spirit that brings life and joy and blessing to those around you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just as you've begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.